The Galactic Council's most secret room held only one document that could make entire star systems tremble. Resolution 2847X sat locked away in quantum-encrypted storage, its contents known to fewer than 12 beings in the entire galaxy. For 300 years, this single piece of legislation had kept humanity banned from every war, every conflict, every military action beyond their own solar system. Most alien species had their own theories about why humans were forbidden from galactic warfare. The lizard-like Draknari laughed and claimed humans were too soft, too emotional to handle real combat. The insectoid hive minds buzzed with amusement, suggesting human individualism made them useless as soldiers. Even the peaceful Altarians whispered that humans were probably too primitive to understand advanced warfare tactics. They were all catastrophically wrong. The truth was buried so deep that even most humans had forgotten it. Only the oldest military archives on Earth contained hints of what really happened during humanity's last sanctioned military action. The younger generation of human officers grew up hearing heroic stories, but the details were always vague, always incomplete. Their grandparents would get distant looks in their eyes when asked about the old wars, then quickly change the subject. Now everything was about to change. Admiral Jiwoo sat in her office overlooking the Pacific Ocean, staring at the most important message humanity had received in centuries. The quantum-encrypted transmission had arrived just hours ago, bearing the official seal of the Galactic Council. Her hands actually trembled as she decoded it, not from fear, but from anticipation mixed with dread. The Zephyrian Empire had finally done it. After decades of aggressive expansion and intimidation, they had declared total war on the Altarian coalition. 12 peaceful star systems were under siege. Billions of innocent civilians faced extermination or slavery. The Zephyrian war machine was unstoppable, their fleet outnumbering the Altarians 10-1. Ambassador Kethvar's message was desperate, almost pleading. The Altarians had exhausted every diplomatic option, called in every favor, begged every ally for help. Nothing worked. The galaxy's other military powers were either too afraid of the Zephyrians or too busy protecting their own territories. In his final transmission to the Council, the Altarian ambassador had said something that shook the foundations of galactic politics. We formally request the immediate suspension of Resolution 2847X. We need the humans. Jiwoo closed her eyes and remembered her grandfather's warnings. He had been there during the last conflict, had seen what humans could accomplish when truly unleashed. His exact words still echoed in her mind. Child, we weren't banned for being weak. We were banned because we were too good at winning. The communication device chimed again. This time it wasn't from the Altarians or the Council. It was from Earth's president, and the message was simple. Protocol 7 is now active. Prepare our forces. The galaxy is about to remember why they feared us. Outside her window, Jiwoo could see the first human warships beginning to move. After 3 centuries of enforced peace, humanity was going back to war. The question wasn't whether they could win. The question was whether the galaxy could survive what humans considered victory. Admiral Jiwoo walked through the corridors of Terra Command, watching her officers prepare for something none of them had ever experienced. The younger soldiers buzzed with excitement, their eyes bright with anticipation. They had grown up on stories of humanity's legendary military past, but those stories were carefully edited versions of the truth. Lieutenant Hyejin practically bounced on her feet as she updated fleet positions on the holographic display. Admiral, the entire 5th Fleet is ready to deploy. This is incredible. We're finally going to show the galaxy what humans can do. Jiwoo smiled sadly at the young woman's enthusiasm. Hyejin was 26 years old, born long after the ban was put in place. She had never seen the aftermath of human warfare, never witnessed what happened when her species decided that winning was the only acceptable outcome. In the corner of the command center, Colonel Taemin stood silently reviewing deployment schedules. At 58, he was old enough to have heard the real stories from his father, who had served in the last conflict. Taemin's expression was grim, his jaw set with the weight of knowledge that the younger officers didn't possess. "Sir," called Out, Captain Dong Hyun from the communications station. We're receiving requests from 17 different news networks. They want to interview our commanders about humanity's return to galactic warfare. How should I respond? Jiwoo considered this carefully. The media wanted a story about heroic humans riding to the rescue, about honor and glory and righteous victory. They wanted the sanitized version that would play well to audiences across human space. They definitely didn't want the truth about what was about to happen. Tell them we'll give interviews after the conflict is resolved, she replied. Right now we have work to do. The truth was that Jiwoo had spent the last 3 days reviewing classified files that most humans weren't allowed to see. The reports from humanity's last military action made for disturbing reading, not because humans had lost, but because they had won so completely that it terrified every other species in the galaxy. General Minho entered the command center, his weathered face showing the strain of the past few days. At 62, he was one of the few active officers who remembered the old ways, who had learned from veterans of the last war. He approached Jiwoo with a tablet containing the final deployment orders. The politicians are asking questions, he said quietly. They want to know if we can win this without crossing any lines. They're worried about our reputation in the galactic community. Jiwoo looked at the tactical displays showing Zephyrian forces devastating Altarian colonies. Millions of innocent beings were dying while politicians worried about public relations. This was exactly the kind of thinking that other species didn't understand about humans. When push came to shove, humans would choose effective action over comfortable morality every single time. Tell the politicians that we'll win this war, she said, her voice carrying the weight of centuries of human military doctrine. But we'll win it our way using human methods. If they want a clean, honorable defeat, they should have sent someone else. The command center fell silent as everyone processed what their admiral had just said. The younger officers looked confused, but the veterans nodded grimly. They understood that humanity was about to remind the galaxy exactly why Resolution 2847X had been necessary in the first place. Captain. Dong Hyun's fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler 442 system, and immediately his bridge crew fell silent. The scene before them was devastating. 12 Zephyrian dreadnoughts had formed a perfect blockade around the main Altarian colony world, their massive ships gleaming like deadly jewels against the stars. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the Zephyrian fleet commander," reported his communications officer. "They're challenging us to honorable combat. They want to meet us in open battle formation." Dong Hyun almost laughed. The Zephyrians expected a traditional space battle, ship against ship, following the ancient rules of galactic warfare that had governed conflicts for thousands of years. They wanted formations and tactics, honor and glory, a clean fight between warriors that would make for good history books. "Send them a response," Dong Hyun said calmly. "Tell them we decline their invitation." His tactical officer, Lieutenant So Young, looked confused. "Sir, if we don't engage them directly, how do we break their blockade? Our 12 ships against their 12 should be an even match." Instead of answering immediately, Dong Hyun activated his ship's cloaking systems. One by one, the other human vessels vanished from Zephyrian sensors, becoming invisible ghosts in the darkness of space. The enemy fleet began scanning frantically, trying to locate the human ships that had simply disappeared. "We're not going to fight their blockade," Dong Hyun explained to his puzzled crew. "We're going to make their blockade irrelevant." For the next 6 hours, the human fleet moved through the system's asteroid belt like silent predators. They didn't engage the Zephyrian ships. Instead, they began a process that no other species had ever attempted in warfare. Using mining equipment and industrial fabricators, they started converting space rocks into weapons. Lieutenant Haewon monitored the operation from the engineering deck. "Sir, we've processed about 2,000 asteroids. The kinetic bombardment system is ready for deployment." The Zephyrians had no idea what was happening. Their sensors couldn't track the cloaked human ships, and their commanders were growing increasingly frustrated. They had expected a glorious battle, not this mysterious disappearance of their enemies. Then the rocks started falling, not onto the planet below, but onto the Zephyrian fleet itself. Thousands of asteroid fragments accelerated to incredible Speeds by human mass drivers began raining down on the blockading ships. Each impact was like a small nuclear explosion, overwhelming their shields and tearing through their hulls. The Zephyrian commander sent frantic messages demanding that the humans face them in proper combat. He called them cowards, accused them of fighting without honor, demanded they follow the established rules of galactic warfare. Dong Hyun finally responded to these complaints with a message that would be remembered throughout the galaxy for centuries to come. Honor is a luxury we can't afford when innocent people are dying. We don't fight wars to prove how brave we are. We fight wars to win them as quickly as possible, with the least loss of life on our side. Within 8 hours, the Zephyrian blockade was broken. Half their ships were destroyed, the rest were fleeing in panic. The Altarian colonies were free, and not a single human life had been lost. But across the galaxy, military commanders of every species were frantically reviewing their own defensive strategies, realizing that everything they thought they knew about warfare had just become obsolete. General Min Ho stood in the temporary command center on the recently liberated Altarian world of Kepler Prime, watching his medics work in the refugee camps. The scene would have confused any other galactic military commander. Human soldiers were treating wounded Zephyrian prisoners with the same careful attention they gave to Altarian civilians and their own injured troops. An Altarian official named Veltar approached Minho with obvious bewilderment written across his scaled features. "General, I don't understand your people. Yesterday your ships destroyed half the Zephyrian fleet without mercy. Today your medics are saving the lives of those same enemies. Which is the real human nature?" Minho watched as Corporal Jinei carefully bandaged a young Zephyrian soldier's arm while speaking to him in gentle, reassuring tones. The alien warrior had been terrified when he first woke up in human custody, but now he seemed almost relaxed. "Both," Minho replied simply. "We fight as hard as necessary to end conflicts quickly, but once the fighting stops, everyone becomes someone who needs help." What Veltar couldn't understand was that humans had learned something most galactic. Species hadn't. Cruelty during battle and compassion after victory weren't contradictory. They were two parts of the same strategy. Win fast and decisively, then immediately begin building the peace that would prevent future wars. Lieutenant Colonel Jae-min hurried into the command center with a tactical update. "Sir, Zephyrian reinforcements are approaching the system. 3. Full battle groups, approximately 40 ships. They'll arrive in 18 hours. The Altarian officials immediately began discussing evacuation plans and defensive positions. They assumed the humans would dig in, fortify the planet, and prepare for a siege. That's how galactic warfare worked. You held territory by defending it with everything you had. Minho surprised everyone by ordering the complete evacuation of all human personnel from the planet. "Sir?" Jaemin looked confused. "Are we abandoning the colony?" "Not abandoning," Minho smiled grimly. "We're preparing a lesson." Over the next 12 hours, human forces methodically withdrew from Kepler Prime. They left behind medical supplies for the civilians, temporary shelters for the refugees, and what appeared to be hastily abandoned military equipment scattered around their former positions. The Altarians watched in growing panic as their human protectors seemed to flee in disorder. Veltar confronted Minho as the general prepared. "To board the last transport. You're running away. The Zephyrians will slaughter everyone when they arrive." Minho placed a reassuring hand on the alien's shoulder. "Watch and learn about human warfare. We don't fight fair, we don't fight for honor, and we definitely don't fight on our enemy's terms." 6 hours after the human withdrawal, the Zephyrian reinforcement fleet arrived at Kepler Prime. Their commanders were delighted to find the planet apparently defenseless, the human cowards having fled at the first sign of real opposition. They deployed their troops to the surface, confident in their easy victory. That's when the abandoned human equipment activated. Every piece of gear the humans had accidentally left behind was actually a sophisticated sensor relay. The Zephyrians had unknowingly deployed their entire force inside the most comprehensive targeting network ever created. Hidden human ships, cloaked and waiting in the outer system, now had perfect real-time data on every enemy position. The bombardment began. 30 seconds later, but this time, The humans weren't targeting ships or military installations. They were systematically destroying every piece of Zephyrian communication equipment, every supply depot, every piece of infrastructure that allowed the enemy fleet to function as a coordinated force. Within 2 hours, 40 Zephyrian warships were floating helplessly in space, unable to communicate with each other, unable to resupply, unable to coordinate any kind of response. They weren't destroyed. They were simply rendered completely ineffective. Minho's final message to the stranded Zephyrian fleet was broadcast on all frequencies. "Surrender now, and we'll provide you with enough supplies to make it home safely. Continue fighting and discover what systematic dismantling really means." Admiral Sujin's flagship hung motionless in the void, facing the most powerful Zephyrian battle fleet ever assembled. Across the gap of space, Admiral Vextar commanded 200 of the Empire's finest warships, their hulls bristling with weapons designed to tear apart entire star systems. This should have been the decisive battle that would determine the fate of the war, but Sujin had no intention of fighting. "Admiral," her tactical officer called out nervously, "the Zephyrians are moving into attack formation. They're charging weapons and requesting our surrender." Sujin studied the enemy fleet formation on her displays. Vextar was positioning his ships exactly as the military academies taught, following strategies that had worked for the Zephyrian Empire for over 1,000 years. Perfect lines, coordinated movements, overwhelming firepower concentrated for maximum effect. "Send a message to Admiral Vextar," Sujin ordered. "Tell him we're honored to face such a distinguished opponent and that we hope this battle will be remembered throughout history." Her communications officer looked puzzled. "Ma'am, shouldn't we be trying to negotiate or delay them somehow?" "Oh, this battle will definitely be remembered," Sujin replied with a slight smile. "But not for the reasons Vextar expects." Instead of moving her ships into battle formation, Sujin activated a system that had been 3 months in the making. While the galaxy's attention had been focused on dramatic space battles and tactical victories, human intelligence operatives had been working on something far more devastating than any weapon. Lieutenant Dongwu managed the Information Warfare Division from his station. "Admiral, Operation Truth Bomb is ready for deployment. We have complete data packages prepared for broadcast across all Zephyrian communication networks." For the past 90 days, human agents had been quietly gathering information throughout Zephyrian space. Not military secrets or battle plans, but something far more dangerous to the Empire's stability. Financial records showing massive corruption among the ruling families. Communication logs revealing how Zephyrian leaders had deliberately started wars to distract from domestic problems. Evidence of war crimes, slavery, and systematic oppression that the Empire had hidden from its own citizens. Most damaging of all were the recordings of Zephyrian nobles laughing about how they sent common soldiers to die in wars, while their own children lived in luxury on the capital worlds. "Begin the broadcast," Sujin commanded. Across Zephyrian space, every communication device, every news network, every public information system suddenly began displaying the truth about their own government. On factory worlds, workers saw proof that their leaders had been stealing their wages for centuries. On military bases, soldiers discovered that their commanders viewed them as expendable tools. On colony worlds, settlers learned that the Empire had been lying about everything from resource allocation to casualty reports. Admiral Vextar's fleet was receiving the same broadcasts. Sujin watched as confusion spread through the enemy formation. Ships began breaking away from their battle positions as crew members demanded explanations from their officers. The first Zephyrian colony to rebel was Theta Centauri, where miners had just learned that their glorious contribution to the Empire was actually funding vacation palaces for corrupt officials. Within hours, 17 more worlds declared independence from the Empire. Vextar's panicked voice crackled across the communication channels. "This is not warfare. This is how humans fight wars," Sujin replied calmly. "We don't just defeat armies, Admiral. We solve the problems that create armies in the first place." By the end of the day, the Zephyrian Empire was collapsing from within. Half of Vextar's fleet had mutinied, their crews refusing to fight for leaders they finally understood were using them. The other half were frantically trying to return to their home systems to deal with widespread rebellions. The great battle never happened. Sujin's fleet never fired a single shot. Instead, they had done something far more effective than destroying the enemy's ships. They had destroyed the enemy's reasons for fighting. Ambassador Kethvar walked through the ruins of what had once been the Zephyrian Empire's most fortified military base. 3 weeks ago, this facility had housed 50,000 soldiers and enough weapons to level entire star systems. Now it was being converted into a refugee processing center by human peacekeeping forces. The transformation was disturbing in ways that Kethvar couldn't quite put into words. Everywhere he looked, human soldiers were working alongside former Zephyrian troops, building temporary shelters and distributing supplies. The same humans who had systematically dismantled the most powerful military empire in the galaxy were now patiently teaching Zephyrian children how to read. Colonel Taimin approached with a status report. "Ambassador, we've processed another 12,000 refugees today. The medical teams report that malnutrition levels are dropping significantly, and we should have basic infrastructure restored within 2 weeks." Kethvar studied the human officer's face, searching for some sign of satisfaction or triumph. Instead, he saw only quiet determination and what humans called compassion. It made no sense. These were the same people who had torn apart the Zephyrian war machine with ruthless efficiency. "Colonel, I need to understand something," Kethvar said carefully. "Your species just achieved the most complete military victory in galactic history. The Zephyrian Empire has completely collapsed. Yet your people act like this is just another day at work. Where is your celebration? Where is your pride?" Taimin looked genuinely puzzled by the question. "Ambassador, why would we celebrate? Millions of people are homeless and hungry. The region is politically unstable. There's decades of rebuilding work ahead of us. This isn't a victory celebration. This is when the real work begins." That evening, Kethvar joined a human planning session where they were designing new governmental structures for the former Zephyrian worlds. Major So Young was explaining to local leaders how democratic processes worked, while Captain Hyejin demonstrated communication technologies that would help scattered communities stay connected. What stunned Kethvar was that the humans were giving away their advantages. They could have easily conquered the collapsed empire, established their own colonial administration, exploited the chaos for their own benefit. Instead, they were systematically empowering local populations to govern themselves. "This makes no strategic sense," Kethvar confided to General Minho during a private meeting. "You've gained complete military superiority over this entire region. Any other species would use that advantage to expand their territory or influence. Why are you essentially giving away your victory?" Minho poured 2 cups of tea and sat down, across from the bewildered ambassador. "Because we didn't fight this war to gain territory or power, Ambassador. We fought it to solve a problem. The problem was that the Zephyrian Empire was aggressive, expansionist, and oppressive. Simply defeating their military doesn't solve that problem. It just creates a power vacuum that someone else might fill." The human general paused to sip his tea before continuing. "Real victory isn't defeating your enemy. Real victory is turning your enemy into someone who doesn't want to be your enemy anymore. That requires addressing the reasons they became hostile in the first place." Over the following days, Kethvar watched human forces implement what they called systematic peacebuilding. They didn't just restore infrastructure, they improved it. They didn't just distribute aid, they taught local communities how to become self-sufficient. Most importantly, they didn't impose human values or systems. They helped each world develop solutions that worked for their own culture and needs. Finally, Kethvar understood why Resolution 2847X had been necessary. It wasn't because humans were too violent for galactic warfare. It was because human warfare was so effective that it made every other military approach obsolete. When humans fought wars, they didn't just win battles, they eliminated the conditions that created conflicts in the first place. No other species could compete with that level of strategic thinking, and most importantly, no other species wanted their own military traditions to become as ruthlessly practical as humanity's had become. Lieutenant Hyejin sat alone in her quarters, aboard the transport ship carrying human forces back to Earth. The young officer, who had been so excited about humanity's return to galactic warfare, now stared blankly at the report scrolling across her tablet. The numbers told the story of complete victory. 0 human military casualties, 3 million Zephyrian lives saved through early medical intervention, 17 worlds liberated, and an entire galactic empire transformed from a threat into a partner. By every measure that military academies used to judge success, this had been a perfect campaign. So why did she feel like crying? The answer lay in the classified reports she'd been reading for the past 3 days. The detailed accounts of how human intelligence operatives had infiltrated Zephyrian society, documenting decades of corruption and oppression. The psychological profiles of enemy commanders, analyzed and exploited to predict their responses. The carefully calculated broadcasts that had torn apart the social fabric of an entire civilization. Captain Dong-hyun found her in the observation lounge, watching the stars drift by outside the viewport. At 34, he was older than most. Of the junior officers, old enough to have heard whispers about why humanity had been banned from galactic conflicts. Having trouble sleeping, he asked, settling into the chair beside her. Sir, I keep thinking about the Zephyrian families, Hyejin said quietly. The ones whose worlds are in chaos because we destroyed their government. I know their leaders were corrupt. I know they were hurting their own people. But, she trailed, off, unable to put her feelings into words. Dong-hyun nodded slowly. You're wondering if there was a gentler way, if we could have achieved the same results without causing so much disruption to ordinary people's lives. Exactly. Every other species in the galaxy fights wars by defeating armies and capturing territory. We fight wars by changing everything. By the time we're done, entire civilizations are different. Is that really better? Before Dong-hyun could answer, Admiral Ji-woo entered the lounge. The older woman looked tired, her face showing the strain of commanding humanity's first military action in 3 centuries. She'd been reviewing casualty reports from across the former Zephyrian Empire, not battle casualties, but the social and economic disruption caused by the rapid collapse of their governmental system. I've been listening to your conversation, Ji-woo said, not apologizing for the intrusion. Lieutenant, your questions are exactly the ones that led to Resolution 2847X in the first place. She moved to the viewport, looking out at the endless stars. 300 years ago, human forces ended the Crythian War in 18 days. We saved millions of lives and prevented a conflict that could have destabilized half the galaxy. The ISUAS Galactic Council thanked us, honored us, and then banned us from ever participating in warfare again. Hyejin looked confused. But why? If we saved so many lives? Because we scared them, Ji-woo replied. Not with our weapons or our tactics, but with our approach to victory. When other species win wars, they celebrate and go home. When humans win wars, we reconstruct entire societies. We don't just defeat our enemies. We turn them into better versions of themselves. The Admiral turned back to face the 2 younger officers. The other species realized that if humans became the galaxy's peacekeepers, within a few centuries every civilization would start to resemble human civilization, not through conquest, but through our definition of what victory actually means. Dong-hyun leaned forward. So, they banned us, not because we were too violent, but because we were too effective at creating peace. Exactly. They wanted to preserve their own ways of life, their own approaches to conflict resolution. They couldn't compete with human methods, so they made sure humans couldn't use those methods. Hyejin felt a chill as the full implications became clear. Ma'am, does that mean we'll be banned again after this conflict? Ji-woo's expression was grim. That remains to be seen, Lieutenant, but I suspect the galaxy is about to have a very serious conversation about what kinds of victory they're willing to accept. Colonel Taemin stood on the observation deck of the former Zephyrian Military Academy, watching human engineers work alongside young Zephyrian cadets to convert weapons training facilities into technical schools. The irony wasn't lost on him. The same building where soldiers had been taught to conquer and oppress was now being transformed into a place where they would learn to build and create. A Zephyrian youth named Kexidal approached him hesitantly. The young alien had been a cadet in the Empire's military program just weeks ago, training to become an officer in their expansionist forces. Now he was learning agricultural engineering from human instructors. "Colonel," Kexdal said in careful, practiced English, "may I ask you something that has been troubling me?" Tamin nodded, encouraging the young Zephyrian to continue. "Your people destroyed everything I was taught to believe in. My government, my military traditions, even my understanding of honor and duty. But then you immediately began helping us rebuild better versions of all those things. Why do you care what happens to us?" The question hit Tamin harder than he expected. Over the past month, he'd been asked similar questions by dozens of former Zephyrian citizens. Each time, he struggled to explain something that felt natural to humans but seemed incomprehensible to other species. "Because leaving you to suffer after defeating you would make us the same kind of people your old leaders were," Tamin replied. "We didn't fight this war to become conquerors. We fought it to eliminate conquest as a concept." Later that evening, Tamin joined a video conference with other human commanders scattered across the former empire. Major So Young was reporting from the industrial world of Vega Prime, where human advisors were helping former weapons manufacturers retool their factories to produce medical equipment and agricultural machinery. "The transition is going faster than expected," So Young reported. "But we're facing resistance from some of the older Zephyrian administrators. They keep asking why we don't just rule them directly. They can't understand a government that doesn't want to control everything." Captain Jinne chimed in from the former capital world. "I'm seeing the same thing. Yesterday, a local official asked me when we were going to start collecting tribute payments. When I explained that we don't want their resources, he accused me of lying. He said every conqueror demands tribute." The conversation highlighted something that had been bothering Tamin for weeks. Humans were spending enormous resources rebuilding the societies they had defeated. Earth's treasury was funding schools, hospitals, and infrastructure projects across dozens of worlds. Human engineers, doctors, and teachers were volunteering for assignments that would keep them away from home for years. Admiral Jiwoo joined the conference from her flagship. "I've been reviewing the cost projections for our reconstruction efforts. We're going to spend more money rebuilding the Zephyrian worlds than we spent on the entire military campaign." "Ma'am," Major So Young asked, "have there been any complaints from Earth about the expense?" Jiwoo's expression was troubled. "That's what concerns me. There haven't been any complaints. The human public seems to accept that this is just what we do after winning wars, but I keep wondering if we're being too idealistic. Other species maintain their empires through force and taxation. We're maintaining peace through charity and education." Tamin understood the Admiral's concern. Humans had developed a form of warfare that was so thorough it didn't just defeat enemies, it transformed them into allies. But this approach required a level of moral commitment that was exhausting to maintain. "Sir," he said carefully, "are you questioning whether our methods are sustainable?" "I'm questioning whether they're fair to our own people," Jiwoo replied. "We're asking human families to sacrifice time, money, and resources to rebuild societies that were recently trying to destroy us. We're sending our best engineers to improve alien worlds instead of improving our own. Is that really justice?" The question hung in the air unanswered. Every human commander on the call understood the moral weight of their victory. They had won completely, but victory had brought responsibilities that other species would never accept. The Galactic Council chamber had never been so quiet. Representatives from 47 species sat in perfect silence, all eyes focused on the human delegation at the center of the Great Hall. 3 months had passed since the end of what historians were already calling the Impossible War, a conflict that had lasted 18 days and resulted in the complete transformation of an entire galactic empire. Ambassador So Young stood at the speaker's podium, representing humanity before the assembled alien governments. Behind her sat Admiral Jiwoo and General Minho, their presence a reminder that Earth now possessed the most effective military force the galaxy had ever witnessed. "Honored delegates," So Young began, her voice carrying clearly through the chambers. "Acoustics. We gather today not to celebrate victory, but to discuss the future of galactic peace." The Draknari representative, his scales rippling with barely controlled anxiety, interrupted immediately. "Ambassador, with respect, we must address the obvious question. Your species has demonstrated military capabilities that make all our defensive preparations obsolete. What assurance can you give us that Earth won't use these methods against us?" Murmurs of agreement echoed throughout the chamber. Every species present had spent the past 3 months frantically reviewing their own military doctrines, trying to figure out how to defend against an enemy that fought wars by eliminating the reasons for fighting them. So Young had expected this question. "Delegate Threxnell, I understand your concerns, but you're thinking about this situation incorrectly. You're asking what will stop us from conquering you. The real question you should be asking is, why would we want to?" The Altarian ambassador, Kethavar, leaned forward in his seat. Having witnessed human methods firsthand, he had become something of an unofficial translator between human thinking and galactic politics. "What Ambassador So Young means," Kethavar explained to the confused delegates, "is that human warfare is designed to eliminate conflicts permanently. Conquering other species would create new conflicts, which contradicts their entire strategic philosophy." "But surely," pressed the insectoid hive queen's representative, "your species must desire expansion, resources, territory. These are the natural drives of all spacefaring civilizations." So Young smiled at the alien's assumption. "That's where you misunderstand us. Humans have learned that the most efficient way to obtain resources isn't to take them from others. It's to help others become prosperous enough to trade freely. The most effective way to ensure our security isn't to conquer potential threats. It's to help potential threats become partners." Admiral Jiwoo rose from her seat and approached the podium. "If I may add something, delegates, 3 months ago, the Zephyrian Empire controlled 17 star systems and had a military budget of 2 trillion credits annually. Today, those same worlds are spending those credits on education, healthcare, and infrastructure. Their planets are more productive than ever. Their people are healthier and happier, and they're contributing to galactic prosperity instead of threatening it." She paused, looking around the chamber at the assembled alien faces. "We didn't defeat the Zephyrian Empire. We cured it. And that cure is now spreading to neighboring systems voluntarily, because prosperity is more attractive than conquest." The chamber erupted in concerned chatter as delegates realized the implications. Human methods weren't just militarily superior, they were economically and socially superior as well. If left unchecked, human approaches to governance, economics, and conflict resolution would gradually replace traditional alien methods simply because they worked better. The Kroonian delegate stood up, his tentacles writhing with agitation. "This is exactly what we feared 3 centuries ago. Your species doesn't conquer through force, you conquer through improvement. How do we preserve our own cultures and traditions when your methods make ours look primitive?" So Young's response was gentle but firm. "We're not asking you to abandon your cultures, Delegate Vorthak. We're offering to help you solve problems that your current methods can't handle. The choice is always yours." General Minho stepped forward with humanity's final proposal. "The Galactic Council can reinstate Resolution 2847X if you choose. You can ban us from military conflicts again, but consider this. The galaxy now faces challenges that traditional warfare cannot solve. Climate disruption, resource depletion, social inequality. These problems require the same systematic approach we used against the Zephyrian Empire." He gestured toward the viewing screens, showing former Zephyrian worlds now thriving under new management. "We're not offering to fight your wars for you. We're offering to help you eliminate the need for wars entirely." The silence that followed was profound. Every delegate understood that they were witnessing a fundamental shift in galactic civilization. The question wasn't whether humanity would be allowed to participate in future conflicts. The question was whether there would be any conflicts left to participate in.